It started with a knock on my door and a pink HOA flyer taped to my fence. I didn't think much of it until bulldozers showed up on the far edge of my land. Land that had been in my family for generations. Land that somehow, overnight, got rezoned, fenced off, and claimed by none other than HOA Karen and her new development project, 98 cookie-cutter homes lined up. Like it was her personal monopoly board. I didn't sell her a single inch. But somehow, she acquired it anyway, waiving permits and plat maps I'd never signed. At first, I tried the polite route. I called, I emailed. I even showed up at an HOA board meeting. But she shut me down at every turn, smirking like she had the whole game rigged. "It's already in progress," she said. "Too late to complain now." Meanwhile, my trees were gone. The land was graded, and foundation trucks rolled in like they owned the place. That's when I decided to dig deeper not into the soil, but into the paperwork, because what Karen didn't know was that her slick little HOA deal had a crack. And that crack, it ran straight back to me. Turns out, she might have taken my land, but I legally controlled something way bigger. I just had to wait for the right moment to show my hand, and when I did, let's just say, those 98 homes. Yeah, they came with one heck of a surprise owner. See, years ago when my grandfather passed, he left behind more than just this patch of land. He left behind a legal safety net, an old trust buried in county records that didn't just name me as heir to the property, but gave me a controlling interest in the land management company that oversaw infrastructure permits for the entire development zone. And the funny part, that same company had quietly been issuing contracts to the HOA for years, long before Karen ever showed up with her glossy pamphlets and fake smiles. She never even checked who was behind the curtain, while Karen and her crew celebrated breaking ground. I was sitting with a real estate attorney and flipping through old binders filled with contracts she clearly never read. She was too busy playing queen of her suburban empire to notice the fine print, especially the clause that said any construction beyond residential improvements needed my signature, and she never got it. Meanwhile, neighbors started reaching out. Turns out, a few weren't too thrilled about her building 98 homes on what was supposed to be a protected green space. One couple, who'd lived there for 22 years, said they were promised walking trails and a nature reserve. Instead, they got floodlights, noise, and a fence cutting through their backyard. I didn't say much then. I let her keep building, keep smiling for the ribbon cuttings. Because when the truth hit, I wanted it to land hard and right in front of every homeowner she misled. It didn't take long before the cracks started to show. Karen was pushing her so-called Lakeview Villas project like it was the next big thing, even hosting wine and cheese mixers for potential buyers right on the unfinished lots. But the homeowners were growing restless. Traffic was getting worse, noise complaints were piling up, and a few trees marked as protected had mysteriously vanished overnight. When one of the neighbors caught a crew bulldozing at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, the frustration finally boiled over. Behind the scenes, I kept collecting every complaint, every misstep. My buddy James, who worked in zoning enforcement, started sending me photos code violations, permit inconsistencies, even a few safety hazards around the construction sites. Karen had cut corners, big ones, and all of it was being documented. I kept quiet, watching her throw HOA funds into marketing, landscaping, even a billboard that read homes almost sold out. But what no one knew was that her funding depended on permits she didn't technically have any more, not without my signature. The real twist, though, came from the inside. Monica, one of Karen's closest allies on the HOA board, pulled me aside after a particularly heated meeting. Turns out, Karen had been using HOA funds to cover personal expenses, vacation flights, spa memberships, even a lease on a luxury car under the HOA's name. Monica had proof, and she was done covering for her. That changed everything, because now it wasn't just about stolen land. It was about fraud, lies, and betrayal right at the heart of the neighborhood. After Monica handed me the folder full of receipts, screenshots, and bank transfers, I knew this wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a ticking time bomb under the entire HOA. I spent the next few nights putting everything in order. I wanted it airtight. I wanted Karen cornered by her own arrogance. Meanwhile, word around the neighborhood was shifting. People who once smiled at her backyard soirees started whispering behind their fences. Trucks were pulling in and out of the construction zone at odd hours, and more than one neighbor had filed anonymous complaints to the county. But Karen, either oblivious or just brazen, held a special HOA meeting and sent out glossy invitations. She called it a progress celebration. I showed up late on purpose, folder in hand, just as she was boasting about new community upgrades funded by strong budget planning. My presence silenced the room. Eyes darted between us, tension so thick you could feel it in your chest. She didn't know what was coming, but I could see the panic flash in her eyes. I waited for the moment she raised her glass. That's when I stepped forward and laid the folder on the table in front of the board. I didn't say a word, just opened the cover. Karen froze. Monica stood behind me, arms crossed, nodding. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Phones came out. People started recording. And just as the pressure hit its peak, a familiar SUV from the county inspector's office pulled into the parking lot outside as the county inspector stepped out of his SUV. The room's energy shifted hard. Karen's confident smirk cracked. This wasn't a scheduled visit. This was a full audit. And it got worse fast. The inspector didn't head for the podium or even acknowledge Karen. He walked straight over to me. "Mr. Mitchell?" he asked. Flipping open a notepad. "We received your file and complaint yesterday. County's been investigating this HOA for months, but your documents finally tied it all together." That's when Karen lost her cool. She stood up, trying to talk over him, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that I was just some disgruntled neighbor trying to sabotage her progress. But it was clear she was grasping. The inspector turned to the board and announced that a full financial freeze was being placed on the HOA's accounts, effective immediately. All construction had to stop, but just when it looked like it couldn't get messier. Monica pulled me aside and whispered, "There's something I didn't include in the folder." She handed me an envelope. Inside were signed transfer papers from years ago. Hen had somehow quietly transferred part of my land into HOA hands through a loophole. And guess who had notarized the document? Her own husband, who was not even licensed at the time. That bombshell shifted everything. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about property fraud. I looked at Monica, stunned. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "And that's not the worst part," she said. "You're not the only one she's done this to." I stood before the county inspector with the forged transfer papers in hand, heart pounding. Karen's face went pale as I calmly handed them over. "This," I said, "is the document that proves she stole my land to build her luxury homes. Not just that she used a fake notary, her husband." The inspector didn't even blink before calling over his colleague to take photos. Karen tried to interject, sputtering something about misunderstanding the paperwork. But it was clear she knew the walls were closing in. Then came the twist. The inspector pulled out a sealed envelope and passed it to me. "Your sister Monica didn't just help build this case, she did more." Inside was a letter from the county commission approving a proposal Monica had quietly pushed through. The HOA's operating land was now under a newly formed trust. And guess who owned that trust? My sister. Karen hadn't just lost her credibility, she'd just lost the entire neighborhood. Karen dropped into her seat, stunned, as board members slowly began to back away from her. I walked outside, looking across the half-built villas that were once mine. This time, they really were. The irony. The HOA had bulldozed my family's property, forced us into court, and pushed every limit tonally to hand it all over in the end. But just as I turned to leave, Monica stopped me again. "There's still one more parcel," she said quietly, "and it's under Karen's name. But she doesn't legally own it." My eyes narrowed. Let's finish this. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled for Karen. That final parcel she claimed. Turned out it was never properly deeded in her name. It belonged to the original ranch estate my grandfather once owned, the one she'd quietly annexed during early development. Monica had already filed the paperwork to reclaim it, and by the time Karen got the letter, her attorney had already quit. The HOA board, once loyal to her every word, voted to remove her completely. Some even apologized to me in person, admitting they never realized how deep Karen's manipulation ran. With the land back in our family name and the neighborhood's leadership shifted under Monica's trust, things finally calmed. Instead of demolishing the half-built homes, we negotiated with a veteran housing nonprofit to convert the area into accessible living for disabled vets, something Monica had dreamed of for years. It felt like justice, but also healing. The community started coming together in ways we never expected.